What is the most heartbreaking thing your child has told you? If you are going to hurt me, just get it over with. My husband and I adopted a troubled teen who came from a line of abusive foster homes. This was about 4 months after living with us, and we got angry at her for something. I don't remember what. Hurt did not mean a slap. It meant choke, punch, or something much worse. It'd been a long few years, but she doesn't fear her own parents anymore. So, this kid wasn't actually mine biologically or anything, but I work in a state-run children's home for abused and/or neglected kids. I, along with the rest of the staff, feed and clothe and house these kids, often for years at a time, until they either age out, turn 18, though we are currently working on being able to offer extended services up to age 21 for those who aren't ready or have extenuating conditions that require more help to function, or are able to return to their families, or are successfully adopted. In the event that returning to their families is not feasible. So I've heard a lot of dark shit over the years. We have kids who've been raped, beaten, given drugs, FARs, mental disorders, emotional disorders, or mixtures of all the above. The one I really remember the most though was this one little boy. He was really articulate and a very smart kid. Good at school, when he wanted to be, fun to be around, well read, for his age, etc. Just so happens his birth parents were abusive and didn't really want to have a kid, so they acted like they didn't have one, and eventually I guess they got their wish. Well, for a long time he was seeing this family that had 2 daughters of their own that were interested in adopting. For those that don't know, this process can take a very long time. So for over a year he'd been seeing this family slowly being integrated into each other's lives. He got real excited about it and would often brag about his sisters. Even though the adoption was not official yet, he'd always tell me it was going to happen soon, and I'd do my best to be supportive, but also try to remind him to be realistic about how fast these things go, or the possibility of things changing. I didn't want him to be a pessimist, but I also didn't want him to get his hopes too high before it was official. Well, long story short, it falls through. They decided, for whatever reasons, they were no longer interested and ended up with a different kid from somewhere else. Good for that kid, of course, but it was really devastating for mine. Especially the way they did it. Apparently they took him on one last outing, got him a toy, and then told him they wouldn't be coming back when they dropped him off back at our place before driving off. I mean, who does that? This happened like a week before Christmas BTW. So I was working Christmas Eve night that year, and he was up late, just reading a small book in his room. Normally we enforced a bedtime for the kids, because they kinda needed that discipline for school, and learning independent living skills, etc. But it was Christmas Eve, they were on break from school, and he wasn't hurting anyone. So I let him stay up and read as long as he was quiet and didn't bother his peers. He ended up coming to his doorway and asked to talk with me for a while, so we did. I was just making small talk, not really intending to get into anything real deep or serious, and since it was Christmas Eve I asked him, without thinking, what he wanted for Christmas in the morning. A family that loves me. We recently had a friend lose their 3-year-old daughter. It brought up a lot of conversations about death with our 5-year-old that were just tough for me as a parent. I know it's a part of life, and I think we handled everything well, but it broke my heart to have to explain everything to him. A week or so after the funeral, he asked what would happen to him and his younger sister if we, his parents, died. He asked if they would be alone and who would take them to school. I explained that his grandparents would, but they would probably go to a different school then, and he told me, if you die, when I'm a grown up but sister isn't, I will take care of her, and I will take her to school. It kind of killed me. I don't know. It's nothing so tragic, but having him come to some sort of understanding about loss was really hard on me. I'm a single father to a 7-year-old boy. He was very close to my dad. My dad, God love him, was an alcoholic and died at 56 3 years ago. One night while my son and I were back in my hometown for his funeral, we were just sort of hanging out on the couch and my son tears up a bit and says, "Daddy, promise you won't ever die." Not really thinking, I replied, "Buddy, we all go sometime. Are you afraid of not having a daddy around to help you?" He replied, "No, I'm afraid of not having you left to love me." It brought on the heartbreak for sure. There was a 9-year-old boy sitting during youth choir rehearsal with tears flowing down his cheeks throughout. Normally, he was very upbeat and enthusiastic about participation, but not this particular day. After rehearsal, I took him aside and asked what was wrong. He said that the wake for his grandmother's funeral was taking place and his parents wouldn't let him go because they thought he was too young to handle it. He just looked at me and said, "I love my grandmother and I want to be with her." Not my child, but when my sister was 4 her dad skipped town, but he still occasionally video called her promising her toys and ice cream etc but never delivered. One morning our mum had to work, and her dad promised he would pick her up and take her out for a few hours while mum worked, but never showed up. I ended up taking her out, and while we were walking she suddenly started crying and asked me why. "Doesn't my daddy love me?" My son was 8 or 9 when he said maybe when I'm in high school people won't make fun of me anymore, and my heart shattered. I had gone up against a school district who called children's services on us in retaliation for reporting the teacher who was bullying my son. I had gone toe to toe with this man. I couldn't do the same with the kids at his new school. He had bruises on his neck from being choked, marks on his arm from those Indian burns, or whatever that lasted 2 days. Bruises he shouldn't have had, that couldn't be explained. He was making up upset stomachs and headaches and other ailments to get out of school. His stepmom and I called repeatedly, tried everything. Finally things stopped, and he's now 11 and happy, but it was a heartbreaking year and I'll never forget those words. As part of my long practicum, I was a student teacher in a grade 3 quarters class that had a girl with extreme behavior issues, lying, stealing, tantrums, running away, physical aggression, etc. She could be really sweet and charming when she wanted to be, but had no control over her emotions and wasn't able to make/keep friends. Nobody ever wanted to sit with her or work on projects with her, and nobody invited her to join their games at lunch or recess. One day she got into a screaming match with some girls who wouldn't let her play a skipping game with them and had to be pulled out of the gym. I was sitting with her in the hallway trying to talk to her about what happened when she burst into helpless tears, the first genuine ones I'd seen from her, and said, "I know it's my fault they don't like me, but I try so hard to be good, and I just can't. I'm so mean and angry all the time and I don't know why. I just want my dad to come take me away." Her dad died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Not me, but my parents. After I got my first pair of glasses at 4 years old, my parents took me to the park, where I said I can see the mountains. The mountains were in clear view of this park. They felt so bad that they still bring it up to this day. I'm going to be 22 this year. The second time was when I was in kindergarten, and I had to draw a picture of my family. When my parents saw the picture, my dad asked, "Where am I?" I replied, "You're never home." After that he went to his boss and told him that he needed to change his hours because his daughter didn't include him in her family drawing. I was babysitting my niece and nephew. Niece was 6 and nephew was a year. I was holding the baby and tickling him and stuff when my niece asked me, "Why do you love my brother more than me?" Broke my heart. I tried to explain that babies just need more attention because they can't do things for themselves like she can. She just said that's what my mom says, too, in this sad voice, like she still thought everyone loved her brother more. I try to spend a little more one-on-one time with her now, and I think she's doing a little better now that her brother is old enough to run around and play with instead of just a screaming potato. This past school year, having my 11-year-old cousin, mind you he is on the spectrum, but high functioning, and one of the sweetest, most tender-hearted kids I've ever known, come home from school and say, "I don't want to be here anymore." Apostrophe. He's been bullied by his friends. I don't mean typical kids being general jerks. These kids would hit on him, choke him, call him retarded, and encouraged him to kill himself. I've been in his shoes, and it shattered my heart to know he'd felt this way. So, I told him, "Buddy, I promise it'll get better. I'll take care of it." Long story short, my grandmother and I went to the school board with all of the evidence that these kids had been abusive to him, as well as the teachers and administrative staff neglecting the ongoing scenario. Previous shithead friends were removed from the school and put into the alternative school. He's doing much better and has made fantastic friends this time around. See? My mom is chillin' right next to me, so I asked her, and her response was, when I told her I was molested and raped for 2 years by a former neighbor, she said she felt like she failed as a parent because she said she should have seen the signs. My poor mom, who's still married and living with my dad, was the only one who stuck by my side through it and went to every court date and crime victim counseling meeting with me. Not my dad, not my brother, no one. My mom is a true hero, but sometimes I think she needs therapy because she's just as damaged as me from it. My 10-year-old sister, I try very hard. I don't miss many classes, and I do my homework by myself, but I only get Cs and Bs. Aubrey misses so many, but she always gets As. It makes me tired. My mother and I know Aubrey's mother from work. She's a teacher who has joked with us about how she does her daughter's homework assignments. And Aubrey hasn't been to school more than 3 days in a week or year because she wasn't feeling it today. It makes me sad that my sister is losing her enthusiasm for learning. She's the sort of kid who finds odd obsessions. Right now it's Helen Keller and Jane Goodall, and she researches them and reads about them near constantly because she can't compete with 40-year-old university-educated helicopter mothers. And her teacher should know enough to see the work in school and the work from home just doesn't match up. My son was talking to his little sister about the tooth fairy. He told her that the tooth fairy brings money for the first few teeth, but then forgets to come for the rest. Turns out that he had lost a couple of teeth that he didn't tell my wife and I about and just believed in the magic of the tooth fairy. I felt so bad. He got a letter in the mail a few days later from the tooth fairy with the $20 in it that apologized to him. She had broken a wing and couldn't get his teeth until a little while later. My son was 5 at the time. There was something on CNN about a large group of Kurds being murdered. He turned to me and said, "Why do they have to kill the kids? They don't have to do that, do they?" Gets me every time I think of it. All I could say is not to worry, that he is safe here and mommy and daddy would protect him. This isn't my story, but one about my friend that cracks me up every time. When she was about 4 and her sister was 7, Sailor Moon was all the rage. They were playing around one day and their apartment was up a story. Her sister said something to the effect of, "I bet you can't jump off this ledge because you're not really Sailor Moon." Of course, in my friend's brilliant and solid 4-year-old logic, she decided to jump off the ledge because being accused of not being Sailor Moon was a damn crime. And it went as well as you all think it did. My friend was in hysterics. Her arm was pretty badly sprained and her mother, a nurse, heard what was going on outside and rushed out to help her and ask what was around. Between fits of sobbing she said, I'm not really Sailor Moon, mama." And her mom told her later it absolutely crushed her heart because it was that moment she could tell my friend had come to realize the harsh realities of what life truly was, and her innocence and joy was going to forever be chipped away from this moment on. Still a great story though. Oh man, my mom told me the worst thing ever was when she took my brother to the doctor. They had to give him a spinal tap because he was getting bruises really easily, so they wanted to test for leukemia. It was negative as fine, but when they held him down and put the huge needle in, he screamed and looked mom in the eye crying that he was sorry and he'll be good and be a good boy forever and ever. Broke her heart, and she had to tell him over and over that he was already a good boy and he did nothing wrong. From then on out she was so traumatized she swore she would pay whatever money and time it consumed to put us under for any kind of painful procedures, and we would get to go to the toy store wherever we had to go get vaccinations. It worked because even if we didn't like the needle, we knew after it we would get a toy. That, and about 2 years later, when I busted my head open on the corner of a fireplace, I needed stitches and she shelled out a lot of cash just so they would give me anesthesia so I wouldn't feel or remember anything. Brother doesn't remember any of that spinal tap at all now, but boy, it messed mom up good. Not my child, but something my 5-year-old niece once said. She was staying with us, me, and my parents, at the time, since her mother was yet again in jail. She walks up to my mom, tugs on her shirt, and says, "Gamma, are you going to leave me too?" I tend to be unmoved by things most of the time, but that fucking destroyed me. Everyone else in the room. We went through an equally turbulent childhood, my sister and I, so she knew exactly what she was doing to this innocent child and didn't care. I would like to say it all turned out alright, but life isn't like the movies. She, and her siblings were eventually taken by the state and adopted out. When my son was 11, he went out trick or treating with his friends. He had been getting bullied on his school bus by some high school kids, to the point where I had to switch his bus completely. Well, apparently he and one friend ran ahead of the parent chaperoning, as it was the end of the night and they wanted to hit a few extra houses before heading home. They were THRN spotted by the bullies. He said the girl in the group said, "Hey look, it's the kid everyone hates," and they surrounded him. They took his bag of candy, dumped it on the ground, and proceeded to stomp it into an unsalvageable mess while laughing at him. The look of utter defeat and his sobs when he got home and told me about it broke my heart that night. My husband wanted to go find them and kick their asses. I've never felt so sad and helpless as that moment. When I went to work that night and told the other nurses, they banded together and gave me a huge bag of candy to give.